Before I realized what was happening, his palms settled against my waist. No sound of movement, no intake of breath, no spoken words. The kiss didn't come immediately. Instead, he drew his finger along my spine with deliberate slowness, as though he understood exactly how that quiet moment would unravel me. I never questioned what this meant between us. I couldn't bring myself to, because in the space between his touch and his departure afterward, I realized he wasn't attempting to make me feel desired. He was testing whether I would shatter, and I crumbled completely without him uttering a single syllable. If that moment left you craving more, hit that like button and subscribe for tales that communicate through stillness and linger in your mind well beyond the final words. Had always imagined that the day I'd dress in white would start with nullities, with golden sunlight warming my cheeks and perhaps laughter I couldn't contain. Instead, it started in quietness. Not the peaceful variety, but that piercing, hollow type that occupies every corner when something vital is absent. The soft leather beneath me was heated by sunshine streaming through the tinted windows. Beyond the glass, New York rushed by concrete, metal, reflections, and somewhere out there, authentic lives unfolding. Mine felt suspended in an odd stillness, caught between duty and banishment. I gazed down at my hand, not at the fresh gold band. They had placed that earlier like a latch clicking shut, but at the silver ring on my other finger, dulled from years of use, loose now from my weight loss. Yet I couldn't stop fidgeting with it. It had belonged to my mother. She wore it on her right hand throughout her life when she stirred broth, when she tucked strands behind my ears, when she folded clothes in the cozy quiet of our old Pennsylvania kitchen. She once whispered to me in a voice tender with something I couldn't grasp then, "This ring holds little monetary value." But I wore it daily to remind myself that whatever I chose to bear, I would carry with dignity. I didn't understand her meaning then. I believe I do now because I just agreed to something I never selected. And somehow I would bear it. The ceremony had occurred 2 hours prior, or at least what resembled one. No attendees, no promises. Merely a private document signing in a hotel suite too refined to feel genuine, where marble floors made my footsteps echo like I was trespassing. Ronan Vu had positioned himself opposite me, towering in charcoal gray, his hair so meticulously styled it appeared carved, his jawline sharp enough to slice through silence itself. He offered no greeting, no smile crossed his face. He signed papers, handed them to the officiant, and studied me for precisely 3 seconds, long enough to make me feel like parchment being evaluated, not a human being. Then he spoke 4 words. The transaction is complete. I hadn't wept. I don't shed tears before strangers, not even the one I just wed, but in the vehicle, with the city humming outside and air thick with cedar and subtle cologne. I felt tears building behind my throat. Not from sorrow, from something more complex. Bitterness, shame, bewilderment about the man my father had transferred me to, like settling a debt. I reached reflexively into the purse on my lap, perhaps to touch the envelope that had contained our wedding bands. 2 rings were inside the gold one for my left hand, and the silver one tucked beneath like someone had made an error. But it wasn't a mistake. A folded paper slip was hidden underneath the silver ring, aged, weathered, creased from time. I unfolded it carefully. My mother's handwriting stared back at me. If you are reading this, then I am likely gone. But I hope you'll remember what I could never express. That was all. The paper had been torn not recently, but cleanly, as if someone had removed a second portion they didn't want discovered. I stared at it, pulse quickening. Not from fear, but from that strange constriction you feel when something personal becomes a mystery. My mother's voice echoed in memory. What we don't say sometimes speaks louder. Who had placed this in the ring box? Ronan wouldn't have handled. Anything sentimental. My father never knew how to fold paper without creasing it like tax documents. That left one possibility, someone who knew both of them, and someone who had secrets to conceal. The car halted. The driver, a man in black with the demeanor of someone who avoided small talk, opened my door. I stepped onto the private driveway of a building that resembled a museum more than a residence. Glass and steel, precise and frigid, like him. Mrs. Vu, the driver said, not unkindly. That name didn't sound like mine. Not yet, perhaps never. The elevator ride upward was silent. When doors parted on the top floor, I entered a penthouse where everything gleamed, yet nothing felt inhabited. The air carried expensive scents, leather, citrus, and something woody. Cedar again, no welcome. No Ronan, just a white envelope on the hallway table bearing my name. Inside, one line in crisp typed letters. There are clothes in the closet. You may do as you wish, but dinners are served at 7. No signature, no warmth, merely instructions. As if I were a new employee, or worse, furniture. That evening, I stood before the massive windows overlooking the city. Lights flickered from thousands of lives I couldn't see. The hum of traffic felt like another world, distant and unreachable. I rotated the silver ring slowly on my finger, then reread my mother's note repeatedly as if the rest might materialize. It didn't. I thought I was entering a marriage. But now I knew I had just stepped into the center of a secret that had begun before my birth. And if I wanted to survive it, not just exist within it, I had to discover who I really married. Because whatever my mother had intended to say, someone didn't want me to hear it. They claimed silence is golden. Whoever said that never lived in a place where silence is manufactured, built into the walls, carved into the spaces between objects, like it's part of the architecture. The penthouse wasn't quiet due to lack of sound. It was quiet because everything within it was designed to remind you who held control. The kitchen hummed when I passed, as if it knew it had been touched. The floors, heated and flawless, gave no sound beneath my bare feet. Even the closet door slid open so gently, they might as well have been concealing secrets. For the first 2 days, I didn't see Ronan at all. I heard him a distant door closing, footsteps in another room, that never approaching, never acknowledging that he had just married me. There was a routine, though, outlined in that cold note. Breakfast delivered at 7, lunch optional, dinner at 7 sharp, served in a formal dining. Room that appeared unused at the first evening I went, he wasn't there. The second evening, I remained in bed and let the food grow cold on its tray. I spent most of that second morning unpacking what little I'd brought. Not that I had much choice. The rest of my life had been folded into 2 suitcases, one containing things I barely recognized anymore. Textbooks I'd never complete, photos from a life that felt like it belonged to a stranger, and a music box that no longer functioned. The master bedroom closet was enormous, larger than my childhood bedroom, and already filled with suits, silk ties, shirts folded like military precision. Ronan's world left no room for anyone else, but someone had made space for me. On the left, someone had hung a careful selection of women's clothing. Understated, elegant, tailored to my measurements with disturbing accuracy. How did he know? It felt like I had been fitted for a life before I agreed to live at around noon. I finally gathered courage to explore the rest of the apartment. It was more like a museum than a home. White walls, large abstract paintings, shelves filled with books that looked read but untouched simultaneously. But it was the study that stopped me. Unlike the rest of the space, it felt softer. A room meant for thought, not display. There was a leather armchair by the window, worn at the corners, a side table with a cup ring on it, a piano in the corner, closed but dusted. I stepped closer. A faint scent still lingered in the air. Not cologne, not would something floral? Jasmine. A single photo frame sat on the desk, turned face down. I reached for it before I could think better of it, fingers pausing just before touching. Something about that felt wrong. Instead, I opened one of the desk drawers, expecting files. What I found was a folded handkerchief, old but clean, monogrammed. With the initials L to my mother's initials, the air left my lungs. Why would Ronan keep something of hers in his private drawer? Was it hers? No, it couldn't be. But it looked identical to the one she used to dab at her neck during hot summers. When the fan wasn't enough, the stitching on the edge, tiny, imperfect, handmade, I closed the drawer slowly, as if I'd just disturbed something ancient. That evening, I stood in the dining room again. This time, Ronan was there, already seated, reading. He didn't look up. When I entered, I took my seat across from him, noting the precision of everything. The silverware, the candle that wasn't lit, the glass of water set exactly 2 inches from my plate. "Thank you," I said softly, not sure what I was thanking him for. He didn't answer. Halfway through the meal, he set his fork down. "I don't expect anything from you," he said without looking at me. "This isn't a test or punishment." I stared at him. "Then what is it?" "A choice." That made me laugh, not loudly, not kindly. "I didn't choose this." He finally looked at me. His eyes were unreadable. "But you chose not to say no." The air between us shifted, brittle like glass. He continued eating. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the city lights. So many lives stacked atop each other. I wondered how many of them were doing what I was pretending to belong somewhere they didn't ask to be. I held the handkerchief in my lap, unable to release it. Had he loved her? Had she loved him? No, it didn't matter. I wasn't my mother. But part of me wished I could ask her why she kept so much inside. Why she never told me what truly mattered until it was too late in the morning. I passed one of the house staff in the hallway, a woman in her 50s, quiet and sharp-eyed. "Excuse me," I said. "Can I ask you something?" She looked at me kindly. "Of course, ma'am." "This handkerchief." I held it up. "Do you know where it came from?" She paused, then gave a small nod. "It belonged to a woman who used to visit Mr. Vu's mother many years ago." I blinked. "You mean my mother?" The woman looked surprised, then her face softened. She never said her name, but yes, it could have been her. He's kept it ever since. I stood there, unsure what to say. The woman hesitated, then added quietly, "He's not as cold as he pretends." That night, I returned to the study. I picked up the photo frame. It was a picture of a lake. Nothing else, just still water. But on the back, someone had written in slanted, "Faded ink, for the days when silence hurts less than memory." And suddenly, I didn't feel like a prisoner. I felt like someone stepping into a story that hadn't been finished. There's a particular stillness in the early morning hours, right before the city remembers it has somewhere to be. A brief moment where everything forgets its own noise. That was when I found the second note. I hadn't gone looking for it. I was just hiding. It felt strange how quickly I'd adopted the habits of the quiet women in my family, finding peace in straightening pillows, smoothing bed sheets, listening for creaks in floors that weren't mine. It made the silence less cruel. The book was one of my mother's favorites, the bell jar. She used to keep it in the cabinet above the stove, oddly enough. Said reading it near the smell of soup made the words feel more forgiving. I'd brought it with me when we left home. Now, as I opened it, a yellowed paper slipped out. It was folded into eighths, torn along the edge like it had been ripped hastily from a notebook. The handwriting was unmistakable my mother's. RV, I don't know how to say this without making everything worse. You never asked me for the truth. And maybe that's why I can't seem to give it to you. But I owe you more than silence. I owe you what I was too weak to carry. I don't regret what we never had. I only regret what she never know. My breath caught. The letter wasn't signed. It wasn't finished. And the name RV wasn't ambiguous Ronan Vu Dot. My mother had written a letter to him, hidden it in her favorite book. And that final line, what she never know, sent my thoughts spiraling. Who was she? Me? Was this what my father had feared all these years? Had my mother ... No, that couldn't be it. I didn't look like him. Not in the slightest. And even if she had loved Ronan, and it was beginning to seem she had, there was no hint of anything improper. My mother was quiet but not careless, loving but never reckless. Still, I couldn't shake the cold bloom of fear in my chest. I had to know Dot by noon. I was sitting in a quiet cafe 3 blocks from the apartment, waiting for a man I hadn't seen since childhood. Mr. Sandler, the lawyer who used to handle my mother's affairs. He was thin now, with a stooped posture and slow gait, but his eyes were alert, still sharp, still kind. I didn't expect to hear from you, he said gently, taking his coffee black. I didn't expect to be married either, I replied, forcing a smile. He chuckled, then studied me. You look like her, not identical, but you have her way of holding things in. I pulled the letter from my bag and placed it on the table. He read it without speaking, then folded it neatly and returned it. Do I need to worry? I asked. He looked at me for a long moment. No, he said firmly. You don't. I exhaled slowly, not realizing I'd been holding my breath. Your mother cared about Ronan, that much I knew. She never said it directly, but she never had to. She respected him, trusted him, and I think he respected her the same way. But they never... No, he said, cutting me off kindly. Never. She met him long after you were born. And even if she had felt more than respect, she never acted on it. I nodded. It made sense. I just needed someone else to say it aloud. Way back, I walked slowly, letting the wind catch the edge of my coat. The afternoon sun brushed my skin. My mother hadn't left me with secrets. She'd left me with silence. And now I understood why not all truths are meant to be told in full. Some are left unfinished on purpose, so that the ones we love can write the ending with their own strength. That evening, I returned to the apartment and found Ronan standing by the window, the first time I'd seen him still. He didn't turn when I entered. I read a letter, I said quietly. His shoulders tensed. I know. Of course he did. I thought for a moment that maybe I was. He turned to face me. You're not. His voice was quiet, steady, kind in a way that surprised me. I would never have married you if there was any doubt, he said. Your mother meant something to me, but not like that. I nodded, tears prickling but not falling. Then why did you keep her handkerchief, her photo? Why keep any of it? He looked at me, and for once the cold in his eyes melted. Because she was the first person who saw me for who I really was and forgave me anyway. We stood in silence after that. Not the sharp kind, not the kind that hides things. This was the silence that sits between two people who have stopped lying to themselves. That night, I opened a new page in my journal. I wrote, my mother didn't leave me a warning. She left me a map, not of roads or destinations, but of how to survive something you didn't ask for. And maybe how to love something that scares you. Some mirrors don't reflect, they echo. That's how it felt, walking past the glass hallway in the penthouse, catching my own face in the reflection and thinking, for just a second, it was hers. My mother's. Maybe it was the way I'd started tying my hair up, the soft cream blouse I'd chosen, or just the air in this place, how it pushed memory to the surface like heat on old wallpaper. But I was beginning to worry, not about the marriage, about who I was becoming inside it, I thought I understood now what Ronan had felt for her. It was never romantic in the way stories made it. It was something quieter, deeper, the kind of bond that formed between two people who had once been utterly alone at the same moment in time and knew it. But if that was true, what was I to him? A continuation, a consolation, a stand-in? That question followed me like a second shadow, especially after I returned to my childhood home. The house had been vacant since my mother passed, but we still owned it. The shutters groaned when I opened them. The air was thick with dust and memories. I needed to breathe something real. I scrubbed the kitchen counter out of habit. I opened the cupboards, half expecting to see the old chipped teacup she used every morning. And then I sat on the floor, right in the center of the room. I used to do that as a child on stormy days when she cooked and sang old folk songs under her breath Vietnamese lullabies. Ones I never learned the words to, only the melody. I hummed one now, softly. The notes cracked from lack of use. And suddenly, I wasn't angry at Ronan anymore. I was angry at myself for thinking real love could survive without risk. For thinking he owed me a perfect explanation before I gave him my imperfect self. I stayed at the house for 3 days. Ronan didn't call. He didn't text, not once. But on the 4th day, a letter arrived handwritten, unfolded. If you're staying because it's what you need, I'll wait. If you're staying because you think I'm still chasing someone else's ghost, then let me say this once and never again. I didn't marry your mother. I didn't love her the way I should have. I respected her, but I see you. And I've never seen anything the way I see you. No signature. Just those words, each one a key in a lock I hadn't known was closed. At night, I drove back to the city. The air was cooler than I expected when I stepped out in front of the building. The doorman asked questions. He only nodded as I passed. When the elevator doors opened, Ronan was already waiting, not dressed for business. No suit, no tie, just a dark sweater, sleeves pushed up. He looked like someone who hadn't slept much, and for once, I didn't feel small in his presence. I felt chosen. I'm not her, I said. His face didn't change. I know. I don't want to be a memory you've repainted. I want to be real, whatever that means. He stepped closer, not rushed, not slow. Then let's start here. He reached into his pocket, pulled something out, and placed it in my hand, a key. To the study, he said. I blinked. It's not locked. It is now, but not to you. Later that evening, I opened the door again. This time, not with hesitation, but with purpose. Inside, I found things I hadn't noticed before: a file with my name. Not as property, but as a person. Interests, schools I'd considered, even recipes I'd once posted online for a college blog. He'd been learning me, not monitoring learning. I sat down in the chair by the window, the one with worn leather and a sun-bleached armrest. I watched the skyline. Then, without really meaning to, I whispered aloud, "Do you see me now, Mom?" There was no answer. Just the sound of traffic far below and the soft breath of someone standing behind me. Ronan. He placed a blanket around my shoulders wordlessly, then sat across from me in silence. But not the kind that hurt, the kind that healed. Coming back wasn't dramatic. No speech, no apology. No, you were right, or I was wrong. Just the sound of the door closing softly behind me. It felt less like a return and more like a decision I hadn't said aloud yet. He didn't meet me at the door this time. Didn't ask why I'd left or why I'd come back. He simply let me in like he'd known I would, but never assumed I should. I unpacked my things quietly, hung the same few blouses back in the closet, placed the silver ring on the tray beside my bedside lamp, and sat by the window for a long time, watching the city. Somewhere out there, people were loving each other out loud. But here in this high-rise apartment, Love, if it existed, had no name yet. Just moments, small gestures, breaths shared in silence. We began sharing dinners again. Not every night, but often enough that it started to feel like a pattern. I noticed the way he waited for me before sitting, the way he poured water into my glass first without asking, the way he pushed the bread basket closer when I didn't reach for it. These things didn't look like romance, but they felt like thought. One evening, I made soup. It was simple, just chicken, ginger, and noodles. My mother's favorite. Ronan came home later than usual, his shoulders stiff with the weight of 1,000 decisions he'd made without speaking. He smelled like cold air and exhaustion. I didn't say a word, just placed the bowl in front of him and sat across from him at the kitchen island. He took one bite, then another, then looked at me like I'd just said something he didn't know he needed to hear. "She used to make this," he said. I nodded. "I know. She made it once after my mother passed. I didn't eat for 2 days. She just placed the bowl in front of me. No speech, no advice." I swallowed. She didn't believe in fixing things, just in being there while they hurt. He didn't respond, just kept eating. But when he finished, he said quietly, "Thank you." The next day, I received a delivery. No card, no note, just a small wooden box engraved with initials AT. Inside was a pen, gold-trimmed, heavy, the kind people give to someone who signs things that matter. It was almost funny. I hadn't signed anything that mattered in a long time, but I knew what it meant. He was giving me agency, a way to write something finally on my own terms. A few days later, we took a walk just down the avenue, past the art galleries and quiet cafes. I'd never seen Ronan in public like that, without an entourage, without tension. He didn't hold my hand, but he walked beside me, matched my pace, slowed when I stopped to look at a flower stall. "You like peonies," he said, surprising me. I looked up. "How do you know?" "You mentioned it once in passing during dinner." I had no memory of that, but he had been listening. We returned home and I went to the study. For the first time, I noticed something new on the shelf, a photo. Not of the lake, not of his empire, but of me sitting by the window a few nights earlier, wrapped in a blanket, looking out at the lights. It wasn't staged. It wasn't posed. He had taken it quietly from the hallway, probably a stolen moment, and yet it didn't feel invasive. It felt like proof that I existed here now, that he saw me not as a guest, not as an echo, but as something singular. That night, I stayed up reading. He walked in at some point, didn't say anything, just sat at the edge of the bed and untied his shoes. When he looked up, I met his eyes. "Do you still feel like you're in control?" I asked. He didn't smile, but his voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. "Less and less." I closed the book, set it aside. There was a long pause before I spoke again. "Do you miss her?" He didn't ask who I meant. He just answered, "No, I miss who I was when she looked at me. And who are you now?" He stood slowly, walked over to my side of the bed, sat beside me, careful. "Not to touch." "I don't know," he said, "but I want to find out with you. We didn't touch that night. We just lay side by side, two people not in love yet, but no longer pretending they weren't moving toward it. There's something oddly humbling about peeling wallpaper. It happened slowly at first, just a corner catching the draft, curling back like it's remembering how the room used to feel. That was what the kitchen wall looked like when we stepped into my childhood home again. "I'm sorry," I said lightly, embarrassed, even though I had nothing to apologize for. Ronan shook his head. "Don't be." He ran his fingers along the edge of the wall, careful like he might offend the house. "It's the kind of place where people lived, really lived." He paused. "That's rare." We came back to clean. That's what I told myself. The house had been sitting empty for months. My father had moved in with his sister upstate, and no one else had bothered with what was left behind dishes half wrapped in newspaper. Old jars of buttons, a drawer full of expired coupons and love letters. Never sent. I asked Ronan if he wanted to come, assuming he'd say no. Instead, he looked at me and said simply, "If it matters to you, it matters to me." We didn't speak much that day. He fixed the back door that had always jammed. I sorted through a box of my mother's scarves, inhaling the faint scent of something. Floral and clean that no longer existed in the world. At one point, I found an old wooden spoon, the end worn down from years of stirring soups and sauces. I laughed genuinely for the first time in weeks. She used to pretend it was a wand when I was sick, I said. She'd tap it on my forehead and say, "This will stir the fever away." Ronan didn't say anything. He just smiled and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. By afternoon, we were sitting on the back steps, drinking tea from mismatched mugs. The sun was warm, the kind that makes you forget for a second what you owe the world. He rolled up his sleeves, elbows on his knees, head tipped back to the sky. "I don't remember the last time I stopped working this long," he said. I watched a breeze pick up a leaf and carry it across the yard. "You don't seem like someone who knows how to stop." He turned toward me, eyes crinkling. "I don't." A pause. "But lately I've wanted to learn." Later I made dinner. Nothing fancy, just grilled cheese and tomato soup. Comfort food. He leaned against the kitchen counter while I moved around the room. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer to help. He just watched, not like he was inspecting, like he was memorizing. When I brought the plates to the table, he sat down with the kind of reverence usually reserved for fine dining. After a few bites, he said, "If you opened a restaurant that served only this, I'd invest everything I own." I laughed. "You say that because you've never had to live on this for a month straight?" "No," he said. "I say that because this tastes like something someone made on purpose." After dinner, we sat on the living room floor, sorting through old boxes of books. I found my mother's notebook, the one she used to jot down grocery lists and small quotes she liked. On the back page, she'd written, "To be loved in silence is still to be loved." I handed it to Ronan without speaking. He read it, handed it back. Then he whispered, "But to be loved out loud, that's the part one never learned." There was a long moment after that, one where the air felt different, like the room itself had exhaled. I didn't think, I just reached for his hand. Not to hold it, just to touch it. Rest my fingers lightly over his. He turned his hand palm up and let them stay there. No promises, no declarations. Just that quiet, shared breath. It was nearly midnight when we finally decided to stay the night. I gave him my father's old room, stripped of personality but still solid. I took my own, which somehow still smelled faintly of lavender and detergent. Even after all this time, I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, staring at the photos still taped to the wall. Me at 6 in a Halloween costume. Me holding a spelling bee trophy I barely remembered winning. I wasn't that girl anymore, but I wasn't the woman I would be yet. Either. In the morning, I found him in the kitchen. He was barefoot, hair tousled, wearing one of my father's old flannel shirts. It hung awkwardly on him, too short in the sleeves, but he looked more human than I'd ever seen him. He was making coffee badly. Water all over the counter, ground spilled. I leaned against the doorframe and smiled. "You look like someone who's never made a cup of coffee in his life." He turned, holding the mug like a peace offering. "I usually have people who do this, and now..." He walked over, handed me the mug, and said quietly, "I want to learn the things that matter to you." We didn't talk about going back to the city that day. We didn't talk about contracts or history or shadows that still hung around the corners of his name. We just existed side by side like a daydream slipped into daylight. and neither of us wanted to wake up yet, I found the rest of the letter in a recipe box. It was tucked behind a worn card for banana bread one my mother used to make when the house felt heavy, when silence filled too many rooms. It wasn't marked. It wasn't even folded neatly. Just a torn scrap of paper, same handwriting, same paper stock, same jagged edge as the unfinished note I'd found weeks earlier. I knew before. I read a word that it belonged to the past I hadn't asked for. But the past has a way of showing up anyway, especially when you're just starting to heal. I only regret what she never know, that I chose her. Not you, not us. She's the only decision I never questioned. I didn't realize I'd stopped breathing. Outside, the afternoon sun had dimmed, and a breeze pressed gently through the screen door, as if even the air understood that something sacred had been broken open. I read the words again, then again. They didn't hurt the way I expected them to. They felt right. Not comforting, not easy, but true. I found my father 2 days later at his sister's home upstate, sitting in the backyard with a mug of tea and the kind of vacant stare I used to mistake for strength. He looked older. Or maybe I just hadn't noticed before how long. He'd been tired. "You came all this way to yell at me?" he asked without turning his head. I sat beside him. "No, I came to ask you if you remember what love feels like." He blinked slowly. "I used to." I held out the torn letter. He took it, read it, said nothing. "She wanted to go with him, didn't she?" I asked. His fingers tightened around the page. "Yes," he said after a long silence. "She packed a bag and then she unpacked it. I didn't ask what happened in between. Maybe she heard me crying in the next room. Maybe she looked at herself in the mirror and couldn't bear the thought of becoming someone she wasn't. Maybe she just loved me more than she wanted to be free. My father didn't explain, but for once, he didn't defend himself either. "She stayed," he said simply. "She chose us." It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest he'd ever come. On the drive back, I played the same song on repeat, a soft instrumental piano track my mother used to hum along with when she cleaned. I let it fill the car, let it carry the weight of all the words she hadn't said, and all the ones I finally understood. Her life hadn't been about grand gestures. It had been about the quiet act of choosing again and again the people she loved, even when they didn't know how to love her. Back when I walked into the penthouse, the lights were dim and Ronan was sitting on the floor of the study, surrounded by papers. He didn't look up. "I wanted to build you something," he said quietly, "not just buy it." He held up a folder. Plans for a small gallery in the neighborhood, featuring young, unknown artists. No press, no headlines, just a place that made room. "For beauty, I've already bought the space," he said. "But I won't put your name on it unless you want me to." I stood there, heart pounding, not because of the gesture, but because of the simplicity.